They blackmailed me over my sister's divorce. But I had a shocking plan. My name is Olivia, and for most of my life, I believed that family was everything. I was raised in a household where loyalty and sacrifice were the foundations of our relationships. My parents, Thomas and Eleanor, worked hard to provide for me and my younger sister, Melanie. We were close, at least, that's what I thought. Growing up, I had always been the responsible one. I got good grades, went to college, and built a stable career in finance. Melanie, on the other hand, was the wild child. She was charming and impulsive, always chasing grand ideas that never quite worked out. My parents doted on her, constantly bailing her out of trouble while expecting me to be the steady, dependable one. I had accepted this dynamic for years, but I never realized how far they were willing to go until the day they called me with their demand. I had just settled into my new apartment in the city, a place I worked hard to afford. It was my sanctuary, quiet, organized, and completely mine. I had carved out a life for myself that I was proud of, away from the chaos of my family's constant dramas. But that phone call shattered my peace in an instant. "Olivia, we need to talk." My mother's voice was heavy with an urgency that made my stomach twist. I knew better than to expect good news from such a tone. I placed the call on speaker, rubbing my temples. "What is it, Mom?" "It's Melanie. Her husband is divorcing her, and she's in trouble. She needs a good lawyer, and we need you to cover the expenses." I sighed, already anticipating the worst. "How much are we talking about?" My father's voice cut in, sharp and authoritative. 50,000. I nearly dropped my phone. "Are you serious? I don't have that kind of money just lying around." "Olivia, you're doing well for yourself. You can take out a loan or dip into your savings," my mother pressed. "It's for your sister. Family supports family." The words hit me like a slap. Family supports family, except when it came to me. I had never once asked them for money, never needed rescuing, and yet they had no qualms about demanding such a staggering sum from me. "I can't do that," I said firmly. "I have my own life, my responsibilities." A cold silence filled the line. Then my father spoke again, his voice eerily calm. "Then you leave us no choice. If you refuse, we'll have to tell everyone what you did." I felt my breath hitch. "What are you talking about?" My mother sighed as if she was disappointed in me. "You know exactly what we mean. And if you don't help, we won't have a choice but to let the truth come out." I had no idea what they were referring to, but the malice in their voices sent a chill through me. This wasn't just a request, it was an ultimatum. I wasn't just being asked to help. I was being blackmailed. And that was the moment I knew, if they wanted a war, they were going to get one. Thomas and Eleanor were the kind of parents who believed in unconditional love, but only when it came to Melanie. My father, Thomas, was a proud man, someone who had worked his way up from nothing and expected his daughters to reflect his success. He saw Melanie as fragile, needing his protection, while I was the one he could rely on. That reliability, however, became my burden. My mother, Eleanor, was softer in tone but no less manipulative. She had a way of making her requests sound like moral obligations, dressing up her demands as acts of familial devotion. And then there was Melanie, my younger sister, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. She was always the center of attention, whether it was for her fleeting passions, disastrous relationships, or financial crises. She had been married for barely 2 years before her husband, Ryan, decided he had enough of her impulsiveness. Their marriage had been a whirlwind, a lavish wedding, extravagant trips, and endless shopping sprees, all funded by my parents. Now, with the divorce looming, Melanie had no way to sustain the lifestyle she was accustomed to. And once again, our parents were ready to rescue her, except this time, they expected me to foot the bill. I had spent my life living in her shadow. As children, Melanie would throw tantrums, and I would be the one scolded for not understanding her needs. If she failed a test, I was blamed for not tutoring her. When she got into trouble as a teenager, reckless parties, skipping school, I was the one grounded, as if my responsibility extended to managing her choices. It was an unspoken rule in our family: Melanie made mistakes, and I fixed them. I had thought that by moving away and carving out a life of my own, I had finally escaped that cycle. But I was wrong. This demand for money was just another reminder that, in their eyes, my success was not my own, it was something they could lay claim to whenever they pleased. Ryan, Melanie's soon-to-be ex-husband, had been the only person in our family to ever challenge her. He was practical, disciplined, and had tried his best to rein in Melanie's excesses. But, as expected, my parents had sided with her when things fell apart. In their narrative, Ryan was the villain, the one who had abandoned their precious daughter. As I processed their ultimatum, I realized something: they were counting on my silence. They thought I would be too scared to ask questions, too guilty to resist. But I had spent years keeping my head down, sacrificing for them. Not anymore. If they wanted to threaten me, I would give them something to be afraid of. The days following my parents' threat were filled with suffocating tension. I couldn't shake the weight of their words, the looming uncertainty of what they thought they had on me. My phone buzzed constantly with missed calls and messages from my mother and father, alternating between pleas and veiled threats. Melanie, of course, remained silent, comfortably assuming I would have just as I always had. But I wasn't going to. Instead of reacting immediately, I decided to gather my information. If my family wanted to blackmail me, I needed to know what I was up against. I reached out to a close friend from college, Laura, who had become a lawyer. Over coffee, I laid out the situation, carefully wording my concerns without fully exposing my vulnerability. "They're bluffing," she said, stirring her cappuccino absent-mindedly. "Or at least, they're banking on you being too scared to call them on it. But you need to know exactly what they're holding over your head." She was right. My parents had never had real dirt on me. I had lived my life avoiding trouble, always the responsible one, always ensuring there was nothing they could use against me. But their confidence and their leverage made me wonder, was there something I had overlooked? The answer came sooner than I expected. That night, my father sent me an email. It was brief, but the attachment it contained made my blood run cold. It was an old, heavily doctored financial statement, one that suggested I had misused company funds from a previous job. A complete fabrication, but one that, if presented the right way, could ruin my career. My hands trembled as I called Laura. She listened carefully before responding, her tone sharp and measured. "This is extortion, Olivia. They're fabricating evidence to force you into compliance. You need to respond carefully." I had two choices: give in to their demands or fight back. And for the first time in my life, I chose the latter. The first thing I did was reach out to Ryan, Melanie's estranged husband. I had always avoided him, knowing my family saw him as the enemy. But now, I needed his insight. When he answered my call, his voice was wary but curious. "I never thought I'd hear from you," he admitted. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath and told him everything. To my surprise, he wasn't shocked. "They've done this before," he said flatly. "When Melanie and I started having problems, they threatened me too. Said they'd ruin my reputation if I didn't agree to their terms in the divorce." My stomach churned. "What did you do?" "I gathered evidence. I documented everything: messages, calls, financial records. I wasn't going to let them control me." His words sparked something in me. If they had threatened him, then there had to be a pattern, a trail of manipulation that stretched beyond just me. Fueled by a newfound determination, I dug into my family's history. I combed through old emails, texts, and financial records. The deeper I looked, the more inconsistencies I found: money mysteriously moved, accounts that didn't add up. My parents had not only enabled Melanie's reckless lifestyle, but they had also manipulated finances to their advantage, leveraging guilt and threats to maintain control. The final blow came when I uncovered something shocking: a slush fund under my mother's name, filled with money funneled from questionable sources. They had spent years pretending to be the noble, sacrificing parents while secretly hoarding wealth behind our backs. Armed with my findings, I made my move. I sent an email back to my father, attaching my documents. "I know what you're doing," I wrote. "And I have proof. If you push me any further, I will expose everything." I hit send and waited. The response was swift and furious. My mother called immediately, her voice shrill and panicked. "Olivia, you don't understand." "No, Mom," I cut her off. "I understand perfectly. And I'm done being your scapegoat." For the first time in my life, I had the upper hand. And I wasn't going to waste it. The night of the confrontation, I felt a storm brewing inside me. My parents had pushed me into a corner for the last time, and now I was ready to fight back. I arranged to meet them at their house, knowing that if I wanted to end this manipulation once and for all, I had to face them in person. As I walked into the living room, I found them both sitting on the couch, my mother with her usual look of concerned disappointment and my father with a steely expression of control. Melanie sat across from them, arms folded, a smug grin tugging at her lips as if she already knew she had won. "So, Olivia, have you come to your senses?" my father asked, his tone calm but patronizing. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. "Actually, yes. I have. And I'm here to tell you that this ends now." My mother sighed dramatically. "Olivia, we only asked you for help. Family takes care of each other. If you refuse, well, you know what's at stake." I narrowed my eyes. "Do I?" "Because I looked into those so-called financial discrepancies you accused me of. I spoke to a lawyer, a very good one, and do you know what she told me? That your evidence is fake. That what you're doing is extortion. And that, legally, I have more than enough to bring charges against you." My father's expression faltered for the first time. "You're bluffing." I pulled out a thick folder from my bag and dropped it onto the coffee table with a heavy thud. "Am I? Because here are records of financial mismanagement, slush funds, and threats you've made against others, Ryan included. I have proof, Dad. Proof that you've been manipulating not just me but everyone around you." My mother's face paled. "Where did you get this?" "You'd be surprised what you can find when you stop being the obedient daughter and start asking questions," I said coldly. "Did you think I'd just roll over and take this? That I'd let you destroy everything I built because Melanie couldn't handle her mess?" Melanie, who had been watching the exchange with mild amusement, suddenly snapped, "Oh, don't act like you're some innocent victim, Olivia. You always think you're better than me, always playing the responsible one. Well, guess what? That's why Mom and Dad trust me more. Because they know you only look out for yourself." I laughed bitterly. "Is that so? Then why am I the one they're trying to extort for $50,000? Because last I checked, being trusted doesn't usually come with blackmail." My father slammed his fist onto the table. "Enough. You think you can come into this house and threaten us? You're still our daughter, Olivia. You owe this family." I met his glare head on. "I owe you nothing. You've taken from me my whole life, and I let you. But not anymore. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to drop this ridiculous attempt to extort me, and in return, I won't go to the authorities with everything I have." My mother gasped. "You wouldn't." "Try me," I said, my voice ice cold. "This is your one chance to walk away from this without legal consequences. But if you push me, I will bury you both in lawsuits and investigations that you won't come back from." A heavy silence filled the room. My father clenched his jaw, his pride warring with the reality of the situation. My mother was visibly shaken, her hands trembling in her lap. Melanie, however, just scowled, her lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, my father exhaled sharply. "Fine. This ends here. But you're making a mistake, Olivia. You're turning your back on your blood." I shook my head. "No, Dad. You did that a long time ago. I'm just finally walking away." I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving behind the only family I had ever known. But for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. Walking away from my parents' house that night was one of the hardest things I had ever done. Even though they had manipulated and blackmailed me, they were still my family. And for a brief moment, I wondered if I had made a mistake, if there had been another way to handle it. But as I got into my car and gripped the steering wheel, a feeling of overwhelming relief washed over me. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to them and won. The next few days were eerily quiet. No calls, no texts, no desperate attempts to reel me back in. I half expected my father to retaliate, but deep down, I knew I had left them with no options. The evidence I had was too strong. They had no choice but to let me go. Melanie, however, was a different story. A few days later, I received a text from her. "I hope you're happy. You ruined everything." I stared at the message for a long time before finally typing back, "No, Melanie. I finally saved myself." She never responded. I knew my decision had fractured my family beyond repair. My parents had built a foundation of control, and when I refused to play their game, it all came crashing down. But in many ways, that was their burden to bear, not mine. Despite the newfound freedom, I had to deal with the emotional fallout. Years of conditioning don't just disappear overnight. I still had moments of guilt, moments where I questioned if I had done the right thing. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the person I had become, the person I fought to protect. Laura, my lawyer friend, was the first person I turned to for reassurance. Over dinner, she listened patiently as I voiced my fears. "It's normal to feel this way, Olivia," she said, sipping her wine. "They trained you to believe you owed them something. But you don't. You took control of your own life, and that's something to be proud of." I nodded, absorbing her words. She was right. I had spent so long trying to earn their love and approval, but love should never come with conditions. I had freed myself from their expectations, and with that freedom came the responsibility of building a life on my terms. I decided to take a break from everything, to travel, to rediscover who I was without the weight of my family's influence. I visited places I had always dreamed of, met people who had no preconceived notions about me, and slowly, piece by piece, rebuilt my sense of self. Months later, I received another text, this time from my mother. "Olivia, we miss you. Can we talk?" It was tempting to believe that they had changed, that maybe, just maybe, they had come to understand my side of things. But I had learned my lesson. Some wounds don't heal with time, they only fade into scars that remind you of the battles you've fought. I stared at the message, my heart conflicted. Then, with a deep breath, I typed my response. "I hope you're doing well. But I've moved on." And just like that, I let them go. Months had passed since I had severed ties with my family, and in that time, I had rebuilt my life in ways I never thought possible. The fear, the guilt, and the self-doubt that once consumed me had slowly faded, replaced by a newfound confidence in myself and my choices. I had found a new job, one that I loved, free from the looming shadow of my parents' influence. I moved into a different apartment, one that truly felt like home, not just a place to escape to. And most importantly, I had surrounded myself with people who supported me, not because they wanted something in return, but simply because they cared. There were still moments when the past tried to claw its way back. On birthdays and holidays, I'd wonder if my parents missed me and if Melanie had ever come to terms with the truth. But I no longer felt the overwhelming urge to reach out, to mend something that had been broken for far too long. Some things, I had come to realize, weren't meant to be fixed. One day, as I was sitting in a coffee shop, sipping on a latte and watching the world move around me, I caught my reflection in the window. The person staring back at me wasn't the scared, manipulated woman I had once been. She was strong. She was free. I smiled to myself, took a deep breath, and let the past go. My story wasn't about the people who tried to control me, it was about how I took my power back. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be. And that's how I reclaimed my life. Walking away from toxic family ties wasn't easy, but it was the best decision I ever made. Sometimes, we're taught that family is everything, but the truth is, real family doesn't manipulate, control, or blackmail. Real family supports you, respects you, and values your happiness. If you've ever found yourself in a similar situation, know that you're not alone. It takes courage to stand up for yourself, and it's okay to choose peace over toxic loyalty. Your life is yours to live, and no one has the right to hold you hostage with guilt or fear. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to cut ties with someone for your well-being? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future uploads. Your support means the world, and together, we can create a space where we encourage and uplift each other. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay strong, stay true to yourself, and never be afraid to take back your power.